Hey everybody, it's John, and I want to make a video here on Japanese knives and how to use them in the kitchen, or how to use knives in the kitchen. And so here are the knives I have. I have my chef's knife, that if you only had to have one knife to do everything in the kitchen, you could do it all with this knife. We'll talk about that some. And that's this knife. It's heavy. It's got a nice rounded back to it. It's got a big handle. This is the Japanese Wagyoto. And this knife is designed to do everything in the kitchen also. The Japanese made this for an American market, but it's not nearly as big. So there are some things you really don't want to do with this knife, but it excels at all kinds of other things. Here's a nigiri, which is designed to cut vegetables. We'll cut some onions, which, you know, most recipes start with onions. It's perfect at that. It's easy to use. It's a safe knife. It's got a lot of knuckle clearance. Then a petty knife. This is a beautiful one. You can see all this hammering and the Damascus, the multiple layers. It's also single edge, so this edge is flat and this edge is beveled. I got it in Tokyo. So a petty knife, and we'll talk about the things to do with the petty knife, and then a small paring knife, which frankly I don't use much, but it definitely has its place, right? You grab it out of the drawer. So let's start with that chef's knife. This is a heavy knife. It's a very safe knife because as you hold it, there's a lot of room for your knuckles. There's a lot of what we call knuckle clearance. And you can get your knuckles on this side and feel really safe about it, whereas something like this is a little lower, and something like this, you can't do that at all. So this knife has a different purpose. So this knife, I don't have any acorn squash, but imagine I did a big piece of acorn squash or a chicken bone or something that you really needed to get through. Well, you can really safely and securely get behind this knife and give it a bang and not pull out your cleaver. Just as an example, if I wanted to cut off the butt end of all the celery, right? You heard that noise. I mean, it just cuts that right off. If then I wanted to cut this so I could feed it to my worms, I can pivot off this little corner right here. It's flat, bit of a curve, quite a bit of a curve, and then a tip. This curve here is designed so you can pivot off of it. 1, 2, 3, turn, 4, and there. That's some worm food. Put worms outside. We'll talk about that in another video. But this knife does quite a lot more than that. So any kind of heavy duty that you feel comfortable doing, you can do with this knife. But a second thing you might do with it is then say, well, I need to cut this up for some stock, just some big chunks, really easy, either like this or choo-choo if you like. Either way, you can turn that into really large dice. Now let's say you're saying, well, I'm making a stir fry, and I need some nice, you know, those kind of Asian style stir fry pieces. There are those. Now let's say you're making a salad and you want those nice skinny little pieces. All I'm doing is moving my hands here behind the knife slowly. And you know, the slower I move my hands, the smaller these pieces. So now here are my salad pieces. Now you're trying to make a mirepoix, right? You're going to make a reduction for, like, say, a jambalaya or something. So this knife now on the tip, I was able to easily cut down my celery and then very quickly reduce that to some large dice or medium dice, really. And then let's say for some reason, I don't know what you're making, but you need small dice. You can certainly then get some small dice going. And then with this knife, actually pretty easily reduce that knife. Even though it's a little heavy, you can reduce that dice down. It's pretty good with that. You can see how I can rock it on the tip. Dude, I'm rocking the knife. Rocking it on the tip, and the knife actually walks along. In the end, I get small dice. So one knife, and we went from breaking the piece off, you know, the butt end, right, or an acorn squash, to some large dice, large pieces, to some nice medium-sized piece. I might put in some thin ones I'd put in a salad, dice for a mirepoix, large dice, and then small dice. The final piece, though, that this knife is good at, if you had to, is at the end of the celery are these great, you can see I get a lot of control over the knife tip. And then here, and I learned this from my French mom, you can take this and you can really walk it. And this is the end of the celery that often we throw away. You put this on a salad, and this happened to me. I'm like, what is this herb on the salad? And we're going on and on and on in French, which I don't really speak. And eventually it turns out it was just the bits of the celery you always threw away. It's bitter, but it's delicious. So you can see here that I can cut with this one chef's knife, I can cut a nice, you know, fine, herby kind of thing I could use on something. We can do better with a different knife, and we will with some dill or some cilantro. But all of this with one knife. So, sorry, if you had to pick just one knife, don't drop it and cut your finger off. The chef's knife is it. All right, let's turn that into some worm food. Second knife I want to talk about is the Wagyoto. This is the knife that the Japanese would use as a chef's knife for something a little easier to work with, like say a cucumber that's not quite as heavy. This knife makes fast work of that. It's lighter, and so you can move it more quickly in your hand. And here I'm working off the mid part of the knife. If I needed to use the butt, I could, but it's not as thick, so I'm not willing to take it through a bone or something like that. But what the Japanese do with this knife is the tip is super thin, so they will use the tip to really, really cut something fine. And this is almost something you'd think you'd do with a paring knife, but the Japanese would do it with this knife, and you're going to end up getting these really, really fine pieces. So that's the thing. What I use this for, though, all the time, like all the time, is this is a shallot, which I use in my kitchen. You know, it's always on the shopping list. They fall apart in soups and stews. They're like onions, but have a beautiful flavor. They're great in tuna salad. So this is like a shallot knife. There you saw I cut off the butt of the shallot. I can go right up the skin like that with this knife because this back part is super, super sharp. I can peel that skin off. I'm comfortable. The knife is small enough. I'm comfortable working with it with just one hand. Whereas this big chef's knife, I can still do it, but it's a bit much. So you can see how the Japanese have a knife for every purpose, which is kind of cool. Oh, there's a little skin left. I can clean that right up with this knife because that again is razor sharp. Back to what I was doing before with the tip, I can get these pieces millimeter thick. Thin. You can hear it, right? You can hear me just getting right through the shallot. And then when I come and cut them, I'm just going to have the tiniest shallot dice. And often this is something you want to do. You want really small shallot. I mean, there's no other knife in my kitchen that can make something that small. And if I wanted to make it even smaller, I certainly could. I could do this rock motion and come right through the shallot, though it really can't get it much smaller than that. That's about as small a mince as you're going to get. So that is the Wagyoto. It's also great if you need to break down herbs and work with them and get, because you can work with the tip and just pick those herb pieces of, say, the cilantro right off and pick out those stems. So in the end, all you have left is just your leaves, and then you can do that walk right through it. And the knife is really light, and so you can move really fast and feel good. You can see on my hand, my thumb, my fingers are all far away. I can always see all of my digits because I'd like to keep seeing all my digits. You'll notice my fingernails are a little dark. That's because I've been sharpening my knives, so they've got a little bit of knife sharpening on them. All right, well that's it. That's my herb. I can keep making that smaller and smaller. The next knife I want to talk about is the petty knife. And this is, oh, no, sorry, change it up, is the nigiri. The nigiri knife is designed for cutting vegetables. So what you can do with a nigiri knife is grab an onion and skin the onion, just like that Wagyoto, and it's pretty good for that. There you go, skinned out my onion. And then it's got a blunt edge and a flat bottom, and it's designed, really, for onions, because how many onions do you have to cut in your life, right? This knife is just designed to work right through vegetables very quickly. It doesn't have a pivot, so you use that choo-choo motion, and it's just gonna, reduce this onion just in seconds to that size. These two need a little more. And that's what you do with the nigiri knife. It's also great if you had to cut up a carrot. Same thing. This knife, it's just easy to work, and it's easy to work very quickly. If you want those small pieces, you can get them. Big pieces, just move your hand a little faster. Halfway up the carrot, cut it, back to it. Okay, and now you're getting those half coins on the carrot. It's a very safe knife to use. It's a safe knife to give to children. They make them bigger or smaller. So that's nigiri, a great Japanese vegetable knife. Next knife to talk about is the petty knife. And this petty knife's a lot of fun. I bought it in Japan, and it's got this beautiful hammering and what's called Damascus. This is multiple layers of steel. This is stainless steel versus my Wagyoto, which is carbon steel. You can see that it's discolored. So the petty knife is good for things like handwork, like I often use it for strawberries or raspberries. You're not going to hold it up close. You're going to work kind of far away. But if you needed to cut up some raspberries like that, or strawberries like that, and get them ready to make a jam or make a pie or put them on your yogurt or whatever, and it's an easy knife to use. It's not a particularly fast knife, and I don't have a lot of skill, but if you were going to do some fancy work with the knife, this would be a knife to choose. Also, it's a great knife, as is the paring knife for bar work, right? So, and the thing about these knives is when you sharpen them, they have the tiniest bit of serration. They look smooth, but it's actually at a microscopic level. And so you just give them a little nudge and it's going to work right through. And this is like an old piece of lime, right, that I've been hanging around. And a knife like this is really easy. You can put pressure on it and get right through it. The paring knife as well, great for things like this. I don't need to tell you how to use a paring knife. If I had an apple, which I don't, I could pare around with the paring knife with my thumb against it. I could then use it to peel. For example, I could peel this tomato with a paring knife. This is something I never do, but the real chefs do. And then they turn the skin into a rose. And so that's the paring knife and the petty knife. I really, really like the petty knife. It's a fun knife. It's a smaller knife, so it's less expensive. You can spend a little more money and get a fancier one, so it's kind of nice like that. And then what I want to do finally for the very end is come back to my Wagyoto knife, which is this, the Japanese workhorse, Japanese chef's knife. And what this knife excels at is also something like cutting a tomato. Tomatoes are tough to cut. It's hard to get through the skin. I sharpen these knives about once a week. I'm going to make a video on that. It's really easy to do. And this knife is so thin that it'll just come right through this tomato. You don't need a serrated knife to cut a tomato. You just need a really sharp. It doesn't have to be a Japanese knife, but a Japanese knife helps. And what you find is with a knife like this that's so incredibly thin, you can cut these tomato slices. Oop, I didn't on that one. But you can cut these tomato slices really, really, really thin. If that's what you need to do. There you go, that one's kind of paper thin in the middle. And then of course it's great, if you need to do a draw cut to make a tomato dice, it does that as well. So then you get a nice tomato dice like that. So these are some of the knives that I use in the kitchen. Going back through, the chef's knife, which you can use for everything. The Wagyoto, which you can see is great for finer and softer materials. The Nigiri, which is really fun for cutting onions, carrots, any kind of veg you need to cut, which a lot of recipes always begin with that. The petty knife, which are just beautiful and very sharp, and you can use for smaller tools. Leela and I once watched a woman in Japan peeling up a leek with a petty knife, a knife about this size, and she was just working it with her thumb. And then finally the paring knife, and I have two of these, and they're just kind of beat around knives, but they have their purpose in the kitchen. So that's it. I hope you've enjoyed this video. And I'm going to make one more on sharpening, and I also have one, if you haven't seen it, that describes these knives in greater detail and what I think about them. So thanks. Have a great weekend, everybody. Bye.